The sky darkened, not with night, but with ash. The air grew heavy and the horizon turned to fire. Across the continents, the oceans began to rise, not as waves, but as walls, rolling over forests, mountains, and cities that should never have existed. In a single night, the world ended twice. And those who survived did not remember the truth, only the fear. Archaeologists call it the end of the Ice Age, but in the oldest myths, it was something else entirely. The day the heavens fell to earth and the gods returned to the stars. Maybe it wasn't the end of the world at all. Maybe it was the end of history, the moment our memory was erased and time began again. Tonight we return to that silence beneath the waves, to the drowned continents, the lost empires, and the echo of the floods that shaped us. If you love uncovering the hidden corners of our past, hit like and subscribe to join this journey, and tell me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is there. The ocean has always been the keeper of secrets. It remembers everything we have forgotten, the rise and fall of continents, the pulse of vanished suns, and the footsteps of civilizations now buried beneath the tide. If you look at a world map today, it feels permanent, as if the blue lines of the sea have always been there, unchanging. But this is an illusion. For most of human history, the world looked very different. Where the North Sea lies now, there were forests and rivers. Where the Java Sea glimmers, there were fertile plains. And between Britain and Scandinavia stretched a land of deer, mammoth, and firelight. A land called Doggerland. 12,000 years ago, the ice began to melt. The air warmed, the glaciers receded, and the seas started to rise. It was slow at first, a whisper, a trickle, a flood that no one noticed. But then something changed. Somewhere across the earth, vast sheets of ice collapsed, sending waves racing across continents. Entire valleys vanished in a single day. Coastlines redrew themselves, and the people who survived carried one memory with them, the memory of drowning. Every culture on Earth tells this same story, not just a flood, but the flood. The Sumerians called it the deluge of Utnapishtim, the Hebrews, Noah's flood. In India, the god Vishnu warned Manu of the waters to come. In Greece, Zeus sent rain until only Deucalion and Pyrrha remained. The Maya remembered Huracan, the storm god who cleansed the earth, thousands of miles apart, with no way to speak to one another. And yet they all tell the same tale. A world before memory, destroyed by water. Coincidence or recollection? Perhaps the flood was not just myth, but a trauma so deep it carved itself into the collective human soul. A memory passed down in stories, encoded in symbols, and whispered across generations that had no words for what they'd seen. When Plato spoke of Atlantis, he said it vanished in a single day and night of misfortune. To him it was a warning against arrogance. But what if it was also a survivor's tale? Plato claimed the story came from Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests, who in turn claimed it was already thousands of years old. Atlantis may have been a name for something far older, something the world forgot not once but twice. Because the ocean doesn't erase, it archives. Only 5% of the seafloor has ever been mapped in detail. That means 95% of our planet's surface, and perhaps 95% of our past, lies hidden in darkness. Sonar scans off the coast of Cuba have revealed geometric structures, terraces, and blocks aligned like streets. Divers near Japan found Yonaguni, a stepped monument carved into the seabed, as if an ancient temple had simply slipped beneath the waves. Along the shores of India, ruins lie half buried beneath the Gulf of Kambat, traced with roads and walls that predate known civilization by millennia. Each discovery whispers the same thing: the ocean remembers. When water rose 120 meters at the end of the Ice Age, it did not rise evenly. It came in pulses, bursts of chaos known as meltwater pulse 1A and 1B. The first swallowed coastlines 14,600 years ago. The second struck around 11,300 years ago. The very moment our ancestors began to rebuild, and the very moment mythology begins. Think about that. The birth of civilization coincides not with peace, but with recovery. The first farmers, the first temples, the first cities, they appear right after the sea took everything. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built 11,500 years ago, emerges like a monument to survival. Massive pillars carved with animals, serpents, and waves. It is as if the people who built it were trying to remember something they could no longer explain. The serpent, the wave, the flood, symbols repeated in every culture. The Egyptians carved the god Hapi with vessels of flowing water. The Mayans spoke of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent who came after the flood. The Sumerians revered Enki, the god of the deep. Different names, same memory. We've been taught that civilization began suddenly, a spark from nothing. But what if it began as remembrance? What if the first builders were not inventors, but survivors? People trying to preserve the last fragments of a world erased by the sea. Sometimes I wonder if the ocean still dreams of them. When waves crash against stone, when the tide pulls back with a sigh, maybe it's not the wind we hear, but the murmuring of ruins, of walls and streets still standing in the dark, waiting to be found. Scientists now know that the Earth's climate operates in cycles. Every 12,000 years or so, something shifts. A pulse, a flare, a cosmic rhythm. And with each pulse, the ice melts, the oceans rise, and the slate of history is wiped clean. We think we are the first, but perhaps we are only the latest. If the ocean could speak, it would tell us that it has seen this before, that it has swallowed worlds greater than ours, and watched new ones crawl from the mud again and again, and that every time we look at the sea and call it eternal until it comes for us too. Maybe that is why we are drawn to its sound, the hush of waves, the endless horizon. It is not peace we feel, but recognition. A distant, wordless memory that says, "You've been here before." Tonight, as you listen to the ocean, remember that beneath its surface lies an archive of time. Cities without names, roads without footsteps, stories that no longer have a language. And maybe, somewhere down there, the ocean is waiting for us to remember as well, because the sea never forgets. It only waits for us to return. When the ocean remembers, it does not speak in words. It speaks in tides. And every tide is a question. How many times have we built the world, only to watch it drown? The name Atlantis has echoed through time like a ghost trapped between myth and memory. It's a word that feels older than language itself. A name whispered by the sea to anyone who listens long enough. Plato was the first to write it down. He said it came from an ancient Egyptian tale, one so old that even the priests who told it no longer knew when it began. They spoke of a mighty empire beyond the pillars of Heracles, a land richer than any other, filled with temples, gardens, and vast canals that glittered beneath a golden sun. It was said to have ruled the known world until it fell. In Timaeus and Critias, Plato describes Atlantis as a civilization of incredible mastery. They had architecture that defied time, fleets that crossed oceans, and palaces whose walls shimmered with precious metals. But their greatest power was not in stone or gold. It was in the harmony they once had with the natural world, until they forgot it. Plato wrote, "When the divine portion began to fade in them and human nature gained the upper hand, they became unable to bear their prosperity. They grew arrogant. They began to conquer instead of create, to take instead of build. And so, he says, the gods sent their judgment, earthquakes, floods, and in a single day and night, the island of Atlantis was swallowed by the sea. For thousands of years we've asked, was it real? Or was it only a metaphor, a warning dressed in story? Maybe both. because every civilization carries the seed of Atlantis within it. The point where brilliance turns to blindness, where mastery becomes hubris, and where nature, silent and patient, finally takes back what was hers. But what if Atlantis was not just a parable? What if it was the last chapter of a forgotten epoch, retold through myth because writing had not yet returned? Consider this. Plato gave astonishingly precise details. Distances, mountains, metals, measurements, even the layout of the city itself. He spoke of a vast circular capital surrounded by rings of water and land, connected by bridges and harbours, an inner temple crowned with a shining statue of Poseidon, the god of the sea, holding 10 horses, symbol of the 10 kingdoms of Atlantis. He even named the rulers. Those are not the words of pure allegory, they are the vocabulary of memory. If Atlantis was real, then where did it lie? Some say the Azores, ancient volcanic peaks rising from the Atlantic ridge. Others point to the Caribbean, where sonar scans have revealed submerged stone platforms deep beneath the waves. Some believe it lies beneath the sands of the Sahara, once a sea itself. And still others look south, to Antarctica, buried beneath miles of ice, as if the earth itself has sealed the truth away. Yet one clue always returns us to time, not place. Plato said Atlantis fell 9,000 years before Solon. That is roughly 11,600 years before our time, the exact moment of the Younger Dryas cataclysm, when glaciers melted, seas rose, and fire fell from the sky. Coincidence or evidence? The ancient cataclysm that ended the Ice Age would have erased coastlines, drowned cities, and shattered civilizations. If Atlantis was one of them, its destruction would not just fit the myth, it would explain it. Because the survivors of that world might have scattered across continents, carrying their memories like embers, teaching the seeds of civilization to new lands, Egypt, Sumer, the Andes, each bearing faint echoes of the same gods, the same geometry, the same story of a flood that cleansed the earth. Even now, we find traces that shouldn't exist. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, shows Antarctica without ice, a shape only visible tens of thousands of years ago. Under the Atlantic, sonar has found massive underwater plateaus with unnatural symmetry, and in the Bahamas, divers still swim past stone roads and curved formations, like fragments of a drowned memory refusing to fade. Skeptics call it coincidence, believers call it proof. But both sides agree on one thing. Atlantis endures because it feels like something we've lost before. It is the archetype of every vanished world, the symbol of a cycle we cannot escape. A rise, a fall, a flood, a silence, then rebirth. And perhaps that is the real message. Plato's words may have survived not to warn us about a place that sank, but about a pattern that never stopped. Because if Earth itself breathes in cycles, if water rises with rhythm, then maybe Atlantis was simply the last world before ours. And maybe we are standing now where they once stood, looking at the same horizon, believing the same lie that it will never reach us. Somewhere, beneath thousands of meters of dark water, the ruins of a forgotten empire still sleep. The sea presses down upon their columns, coral clings to their walls, and the currents hum the same quiet hymn they've sung for 12 millennia. It is not silence, it is memory. And the ocean, patient, endless, unforgiving, remembers them still. Perhaps that is why we cannot stop searching for Atlantis, not because we need to prove it existed, but because deep down we remember it too. But what if Atlantis was not the only one? What if there were others, entire continents that drowned long before our history began? Lands whose memory survives only in whispers, in the names Lemuria, Mu. What secrets sleep beneath those waves? And why do they all tell the same story? They say the ocean holds more than the bones of ships and sailors. it holds forgotten continents, whole worlds that once breathed, sang, and vanished. One of those names is Lemuria, a word that doesn't belong to any language, yet feels strangely familiar, as if whispered in dreams by the sea itself. In the 19th century, before genetics or plate tectonics, a few scientists studying the distribution of lemurs between Madagascar and India proposed something curious. A lost land once bridged the two. They called it Lemuria. But long before that, the people who lived along the rim of the Indian Ocean already spoke of a sunken kingdom beneath the waves. In Tamil lore, it was Kumari Kandam, a vast fertile land where poets, astronomers, and kings ruled for thousands of years before the sea swallowed them whole. Old palm leaf manuscripts speak of cities with shining towers, of scholars who measured the stars, of rivers that no longer exist. They say the Great Flood came not once but many times. Each time, a little more of their world disappeared beneath the waves. The survivors fled north and east, carrying their language, their myths, and the faint memory of a home that no longer had a name. When British colonials heard these tales in the 1800s, they dismissed them as fantasy. But something about the stories refused to die, because at the same time, explorers were finding strange parallels half a world away. On the islands of Polynesia, legends spoke of Hiva, a motherland that sank beneath the sea. In Madagascar, elders still told of a land bridge to the east where ancestors once lived among giant birds and gods of light. And in Indonesia, divers found submerged terraces and walls stretching for miles, remnants of civilizations predating recorded time. What connected these voices from opposite sides of the ocean? Geologists now know that during the last ice age, sea levels were over 100 meters lower. The Sunda Shelf, stretching from Sumatra to Borneo, was a single massive landmass. Rivers that are now drowned deltas once flowed into fertile plains where millions of people could have lived. When the ice melted, that world disappeared, slowly, then suddenly, just like the myth of Lemuria describes. So perhaps Lemuria was not an invention of Victorian science, but a distorted echo of something real. A continent that existed during humanity's forgotten dawn. A place where seafarers could sail from Africa to Asia without ever losing sight of land. A cradle of early knowledge, erased when the ocean took back its territory. Ancient temples in southern India still face west, toward the drowned lands. Stone carvings along the coast depict waves, serpents, and suns half buried by water. Some scholars believe these are metaphors. Others believe they are memories. If the myths are true, Kumari Kandam was once home to 3 great academies, centres of wisdom known as the Sangams, where poets recorded the laws of heaven and earth, where astronomers charted the skies before our recorded time. When the sea consumed the land, those archives were lost. Only fragments survived, scattered through verses that hint at a catastrophe beyond imagining, and yet every fragment feels familiar. The flood, the exodus, the survivors who carried light to a darkened world. The same pattern found in Sumer, in Egypt, in the Andes. Different names, same memory. What if Lemuria was the eastern mirror of Atlantis? 2 halves of a forgotten world, one in the Atlantic, one in the Indian Ocean, each carrying the same wound, the same silence after the sea rose. Even today, sonar scans of the Indian Ocean reveal structures that don't belong there. At the bottom of the Gulf of Mannar, long ridges stretch in perfect alignment, as if they were once roads or walls. And off the coast of Sri Lanka, fishermen speak of the city that glows beneath the waves, where lights shimmer on moonless nights. Coincidence, illusion, or memory? The deeper we look, the more it seems that our planet remembers even when we do not. Lemuria, if it ever existed, would have connected continents, people, and mythologies long before history began. It might explain why civilizations separated by oceans share the same symbols. the spiral of creation, the serpent of knowledge, the temple aligned to the solstice sun, as if the same blueprint spread across the world, carried by those who survived when the earth last drowned. Maybe that is why the legend refuses to fade, because it's not only about a land lost to the sea, it's about a memory lost to ourselves, a feeling that somewhere, deep beneath the blue horizon, lies the origin we can't quite remember, but can never fully forget. And perhaps that memory is calling again. Every time the tide retreats, every time an ancient coastline appears on sonar, we are reminded that the ocean's silence is not emptiness. It's waiting for us to listen. We like to think of the sea as a boundary, but maybe it's the opposite, a mirror. When we gaze across it, we are not looking into distance, but into our own reflection. And the reflection is older than we are willing to believe. If Atlantis was the world that drowned in the west, then Lemuria was its echo in the east. A civilization erased by time, remembered only by the water that took it. But the ocean never keeps its secrets forever. Sometimes it returns them, one ripple, one ruin, one rumor at a time. And so we ask, if Lemuria truly vanished beneath the Indian and Pacific seas, then what else sleeps beyond it? In the deepest waters of the world, where even memory cannot reach. Could there be another continent still waiting to be remembered? One whose story began not with the flood, but with the fire beneath the sea. Across the great expanse of the Pacific, there are islands that seem like scattered pieces of something larger, like the fragments of a world shattered long ago. Between them stretch thousands of miles of open ocean, yet their myths, their gods, their symbols all seem to whisper the same name, Mu. For centuries, this name lingered in the half-light between legend and speculation. The first to speak it aloud was a man named James Churchward, a British officer stationed in India in the late 1800s. He claimed to have studied ancient tablets, written in a language older than Sanskrit, that told of a vast continent stretching from Asia to the Americas, a land of temples and cities, where a radiant civilization flourished before it sank beneath the sea. He called it Mu. To most scholars, Churchward was a dreamer, a man chasing ghosts in old clay. But what if some dreams are echoes? What if he was only remembering something the earth itself once knew? Because long before Churchward, Polynesian navigators spoke of a sacred homeland far to the west called Hiva. The Maori called it Hawaii, the place where the first ancestors came from. In the islands of Micronesia and the Marquesas, songs still tell of a shining world that fell into the sea, a place where gods and mortals lived together until the ocean rose in fury. And even across the ocean, in the myths of the Maya and Aztec, there are faint reflections, stories of Tulan, the place of origin, beyond the sea, swallowed by water and fire. These tales were never connected by trade or empire. They were connected by memory. The Pacific Ocean, vast and inscrutable, may once have hidden more than islands. It may have hidden an entire chapter of human history. Imagine a world of lush continents now gone, dotted with volcanoes and inland seas, where cities of stone gleamed beneath a sun that never set. A world with temples aligned to the stars, where travellers could sail for weeks and still see the lights of civilization on the horizon. Then imagine the earth itself shifting beneath their feet, fire cracking open the ocean floor, waves rising higher than mountains. In the end, the land tore apart, the sea rushed in, and everything that had been built disappeared in a single breath. Churchward claimed that 63 million people died when Mu fell. He described it as the cradle of all later civilizations, Atlantis, Egypt, Sumer, India, all descended from its survivors. He believed the refugees of Mu spread across the world, carrying fragments of a language, a faith, a science. He believed they left clues in every temple, every glyph, every myth that spoke of gods from across the sea. We cannot prove that Mu existed, yet we cannot explain why its fingerprints appear everywhere. The pyramids of Mesoamerica and the temples of Angkor share not just form but function, built upon the same sacred geometry, the same celestial alignment. The megaliths of Easter Island, facing the sea with solemn eyes, are said to guard the direction of their lost homeland. And the symbols carved into stones there, spirals, eyes, solar rays, echo the markings found in India and Peru. Coincidence or inheritance? In recent years, oceanographers have mapped strange ridges and plateaus hidden beneath the Pacific. The Tuamotu Plateau, the Nazca Ridge, the Ontong Java Plateau, continental in scale, yet now buried beneath kilometers of water. Some geologists believe these were once above sea level, torn apart by shifting plates, drowned by the same forces that sculpted the Ring of Fire. Perhaps these are the bones of Mu, scattered across the ocean floor. But even if the land itself is gone, the memory remains. In Polynesia, the word moana doesn't just mean ocean, it means origin. The sea is not a barrier, it is the womb of time. And in that vast womb, every island is a memory surfacing from the deep. When you stand on the edge of an island and watch the sun melt into the horizon, you are standing at the border between two worlds, the one we know and the one that remembers. The waves that lap your feet have travelled from places that no longer exist. They carry dust from mountains that sank before history, whispers from cities that no one ever named. Perhaps that is why the people of the Pacific still sing to the sea, not as worship, but as remembrance. Because somewhere, beneath those endless blue miles, something ancient still sleeps. And maybe, just maybe, it dreams. If Atlantis was the legend of the West, and Lemuria the echo of the Indian seas, then Mu is the memory of the Pacific, the last voice of a world erased not just by water, but by time itself. And if all three worlds tell the same story, three continents, three cataclysms, three silences, then perhaps they were never separate at all. Perhaps they were once one. So we ask, what really connects these vanished worlds? Is it myth or memory? And if they were fragments of a single civilization that stretched across the globe, what power did that world possess, and what knowledge did it take with it into the deep? Could the answers lie not in the sea, but in the stones that remain on land, monuments too old to explain, too perfect to have been built by those who came after? What if the survivors of Mu left us a message, carved in stone, waiting to be seen? Long before the North Sea existed, before England was an island and Scandinavia a distant shore, there was a vast plain stretching between them, a green, endless land of rivers, forests, and mist. Deer grazed in its meadows. Mammoths roamed near its lakes. Human hunters followed the herds beneath skies heavy with cloud. This was Doggerland, the heart of ancient Europe, a world erased not by myth, but by water. For thousands of years, Doggerland was home to people who left no cities, no pyramids, no written records, only the faint traces of hearths buried under silt and tools scattered like memories across the seabed. To those who lived there, the land seemed eternal. The horizon stretched without end. The sea was far away, a rumour at the edge of the world. But the earth was changing. As the glaciers of the last ice age melted, rivers swelled, valleys filled, and the tide crept inland year after year. Generations passed, children were born and died as the ocean advanced, silently, almost patiently. Villages moved higher. The people followed the animals inland, but the land kept shrinking until one day it was gone. The final blow came around 200 years ago. To the north, a wall of earth collapsed beneath the ocean. It was the Storegga Slide, a massive undersea landslide off the coast of Norway. It unleashed a tsunami that towered over the North Atlantic. The waves raced toward the lowlands of Doggerland, and in a single day, the last of that ancient plain was swallowed. When the sea settled, Europe had been reshaped. Britain was cut off from the continent. The North Sea became a graveyard, not of ships but of worlds. For centuries, fishermen have dredged up its bones. Antlers, mammoth tusks, flint tools, even human remains stained dark by the salt. Every object tells the same quiet truth, that this was once dry land, warm and alive, before it became a cold grey sea. Archaeologists now call Doggerland the Atlantis of the North, but unlike Atlantis, its story isn't told in myth, it's told in mud, pollen and DNA. Sediment cores taken from the seabed reveal ancient forests, oak, pine, birch, and the pollen of wildflowers that haven't grown there for 10,000 years. And as sonar sweeps across the deep, it maps ghostly riverbeds and lake shores that once carried life. It's strange to think that a fisherman's net can pull up fragments of an entire forgotten world. A splinter of antler carved by human hands. A flint blade last held by someone who watched the sea coming for his home. To those ancient people, the flood must have felt like a slow nightmare, the world dissolving day by day. They might have seen the sea as a living thing, hungry and unstoppable. They might have prayed to it, bargained with it, tried to remember its moods. But nothing could stop it, and so they left. Some travelled south into Europe, others north to the new islands that would become Britain. Maybe they carried stories, not just of loss, but of warning, stories that would become myths of floods and gods and drowned lands, passed down through the ages until memory blurred into legend. When Plato wrote of Atlantis, could he have been echoing these same ancestral fears? A distant retelling of the time when the world itself changed shape. Perhaps every culture remembers its own Doggerland, its own paradise lost beneath the sea. But Doggerland is different. It is not imagined. It can be mapped, measured and touched. It is proof that entire worlds can vanish, not once but many times, and that humanity always finds a way to forget until the next tide comes. And now, millennia later, the tides are rising again. The same North Sea that hides the past is creeping higher with each passing year. Coastlines retreat, storms grow stronger, and once again the water is coming. It's as if the ocean is remembering, repeating a pattern older than history. Doggerland reminds us of something uncomfortable. Civilization doesn't begin where the sea stops. It begins when the sea recedes. And when it returns, so too does the silence. Maybe that's why the stories of Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu never fade. Because deep down we all know the flood was real. We've seen it before. We've survived it before. And we may face it again. Doggerland was not just a place. It was a mirror, a memory of how fragile our world truly is. And somewhere beneath the cold waters of the North Sea, the echoes of that lost land still call to us. So the question remains, if the North Sea hides Europe's forgotten Atlantis, then what lies waiting beneath the warm sands of the south? In the drowned lands of Asia, where rivers once flowed through jungles and temples before the flood came again. Before there was an Indonesia, before the South China Sea and the Gulf of Thailand, there was a single vast world of rivers, deltas and rain, a land where elephants roamed alongside tigers, where early humans carved tools from stone beside winding channels that shimmered in the tropical sun. It was a land larger than India, connecting today's islands of Sumatra, Java, Borneo and the Malay Peninsula, a continent now drowned beneath the sea. This was Sunderland, the forgotten cradle of Asia. 12,000 years ago, when the last ice age still held the poles in its frozen grip, sea levels were lower by more than 100 metres. The Sunda Shelf, now hidden beneath the waves, was a vast lowland plain. Rivers that we know today as separate, the Mekong, the Chao Phraya, the Mahakam, all flowed together into a single massive river system that wound across this sunlit land before meeting the ocean somewhere far to the south. For tens of thousands of years it was paradise. The soil was rich, the forests endless, and the climate gentle. Archaeologists believe humans lived there for over 50,000 years, hunting, building, exploring, long before the world's first civilizations appeared in Mesopotamia or the Nile. And then, as the glaciers melted, the sea began to rise. At first it might have seemed harmless, a river running higher, a marsh that never drained, a shoreline that crept a little farther inland each year. But generation after generation, the water never stopped. The world they knew shrank until only the highest ridges and mountains remained above the tide. Those mountains became the islands we know today: Sumatra, Java, Borneo, Bali. The people of Sunderland were forced to scatter. Some fled north into the Asian mainland. Others journeyed east into the Pacific, becoming the ancestors of the Austronesian peoples, the sailors who would later cross half the world. They carried with them the seeds of a story of a world swallowed by the sea. Echoes of Sunderland's memory still ripple through the myths of Asia. In Java, old songs speak of Nusantara, the islands between, once one land before it broke apart. In the Philippines, stories tell of a great flood that divided the islands. In Vietnam and Thailand, ancient myths recall dragons and goddesses who tried to hold back the ocean but failed. Even in India, there are tales of a southern paradise that sank beneath the waves, the same story we heard in Lemuria, told again in a different tongue. Could all these stories be fragments of the same event? Modern science has begun to uncover what myth never forgot. Beneath the Java Sea, sonar has revealed strange patterns: linear ridges, terraces, and what appear to be ancient river valleys. Cores taken from the seabed show layers of pollen, charcoal, and soil, the signatures of forests and fire. Once, where fish now swim, there were trees and human camps, and there are mysteries that still defy explanation. Why do so many ancient temples across Asia, from Angkor in Cambodia to Borobudur in Java, seem aligned to constellations that would have been directly overhead thousands of years before they were built? Why do they share the same geometry, the same cosmic pattern, as if inherited from a blueprint far older than the temples themselves? Perhaps these are remnants of an earlier world, one that vanished before history could record its name. When British geneticists mapped the DNA of Southeast Asia's people, they found something extraordinary: a deep ancient lineage, older than the first Chinese dynasties, older than the Indus Valley, stretching back to a population that lived here when the seas were still low. It suggests that long before the supposed centres of civilization, the tropics of Southeast Asia may have already been alive with knowledge, art, and structure. The ocean that buried Sunderland may have also preserved its memory. Beneath the warm waters of the South China Sea lie caves filled with stalagmites that grew during the Ice Age. When scientists analysed them, they found evidence of sudden floods, immense surges of water rushing through the region around 11,600 years ago. That date again. The same moment the Younger Dryas ended, the same moment Atlantis supposedly fell, the same turning of the Earth's clock when so much was lost. Everywhere we look, the pattern repeats: a golden age, a rising sea, a silence, then a rebirth. In Egypt, in Sumer, in India, as if the survivors began again, remembering only fragments of what came before. So was Sunderland merely another Atlantis, another land swallowed by time? Or was it something more? Could it have been the missing link, the true motherland from which the stories of Atlantis and Lemuria both descend? If so, then perhaps the legends did not begin in the West at all, but here, in the jungles of Asia, where the ocean keeps its secrets close. What we call myth might be nothing more than the memory of land. And land, once lost, does not vanish. It lingers, in stone, in language, in the tides themselves. But if the world beneath Sunderland truly existed, what traces did its people leave behind? Are there monuments older than we think, hidden in plain sight, built by hands that remembered a civilization the sea erased? And if those monuments still stand, could they be telling us a story that modern history has forgotten to hear? Because when the waters rose, perhaps not everything was lost. Perhaps some of what survived was carved in stone, in places the flood could not reach. If the lands beneath the ocean hold our past, then what secrets lie above it, in the mountains of stone that defy time and logic? What if the next key to this forgotten world is not under the sea, but standing before us in the megaliths that still endure? Every flood has an echo. Every world that drowns leaves a memory beneath the waves, and sometimes those memories repeat. When the last ice age ended, the earth began to thaw. But it didn't happen all at once. The sea rose not in a single surge, but in pulses, two great floods separated by thousands of years. The first came suddenly, around 14,600 years ago. The second, roughly 11,600 years ago. Together they ended an age and began another. Scientists call them meltwater pulse 1A and 1B. But to the ancients they were not data points. They were apocalypse. The first flood swallowed coastlines, forests and plains that had been home to humanity for tens of thousands of years. The second erased what remained, the last fragments of the world before history. 2 drownings, 2 silences, and between them a moment of fragile life, a brief return of spring before the earth trembled again. The more we look at the evidence, the more it feels like our planet breathes in cycles. Long rhythmic inhales and exhales of creation and destruction. Each breath reshapes the world, erasing civilizations, leaving behind only ruins for the next to find. But what could have caused such violent changes? Ice doesn't melt this fast on its own. Some scientists point to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, fragments of a shattered comet striking the Earth near the end of the Ice Age. The explosions would have ignited wildfires across continents, turned skies black with soot, and sent shockwaves through the planet's climate. In a matter of years, the temperature plunged. Then as the dust settled, the ice melted in torrents, the ocean rose, and the world drowned again. Around this time, strange things begin to appear in the archaeological record. Massive construction projects like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built by people who were supposedly hunter-gatherers. Giant stones weighing tens of tons, carved and arranged with stellar precision. It was as if, in the ashes of cataclysm, a memory awoke. A group of survivors, carrying knowledge from before the flood, began to rebuild. If the flood was an ending, Göbekli Tepe was the first whisper of a new beginning. Across the planet, the pattern is the same. In Peru, at Caral and Pumapunku, civilizations emerge suddenly, without a trace of gradual development. In Egypt, the first dynasties appear seemingly from nowhere, their symbols already mature, their gods already old. And in Mesopotamia, the Sumerians write of kings who ruled before the flood, rulers whose lifespans were counted not in years, but in thousands. It's as if the world before ours had reached a peak and then was struck down. Those who survived remembered fragments, geometry, astronomy, the language of the stars. They passed them down as myths, as temples, as monuments. And when the next flood came, it erased their cities, but not their memory. Every story of a great deluge, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Popol Vuh, may be describing not one flood, but 2. The first, a warning. The second, a reset. If so, then human history as we know it begins not with creation, but with survival. And that raises a question far deeper than the ocean itself. Why does the cycle repeat? Is it simply nature, the slow rhythm of a living planet, or something else? Could these floods have been triggered by forces greater than ice and fire? The sun, perhaps, with its hidden cycles of radiation and magnetic storms? Or cosmic debris fields, invisible paths of destruction that the Earth passes through every 12,000 years? Some scientists now believe we are overdue for another cycle. The ice at the poles is melting faster than ever. The magnetic field is weakening, and strange fireballs have begun to appear in the sky, as if the heavens are stirring once more. We tell ourselves that we are safe, that the flood is only a myth, but so did they. Every civilization has thought itself untouchable, until the sea proved otherwise. Maybe that's why these ancient stories still haunt us, because somewhere deep in our bones, we know the pattern isn't finished. We are living in the pause between the pulses, the quiet between the tides. When the next one comes, it won't matter what we believe. The ocean will rise, the earth will tremble, and the story will begin again. And perhaps that is the true meaning of the myth. Not destruction, but renewal. A reset of the world, a cleansing of time, a chance to remember who we once were. But if our world really has drowned twice before, then what remains of those who came before us? Are there traces of their cities, their machines, their knowledge, buried not beneath water, but beneath the stones of the earth itself? If we dig deep enough, could we find the fingerprints of the builders who remembered the first dawn, the ones who raised monuments that would outlast every flood? And if we can find them, what would those stones say about who they were and who we truly are? Because if the sea erased their world, the stone may still remember. So let's look closer at the impossible ruins, the megaliths that defy time, and the forgotten engineers who built them. Could they be the last survivors of the world before the flood? When the water receded, the world was unrecognizable. Mountains that had once been islands became the new continents. The old coasts had vanished, swallowed whole, and the maps of memory were blank. For generations, humanity wandered through the ruins of what it no longer understood, the survivors of a world erased. They were not many. Some fled to the highlands, others to the caves and valleys untouched by the floods. They lived among the shadows of things they could not rebuild, carrying fragments of knowledge like embers saved from a dying fire. But in those embers was the blueprint of the past, the memory of what once had been. We call them the first farmers, the first builders, the first astronomers. But what if they were really the last survivors of a lost civilization? The remnants of those who had watched the ocean rise and seen their world dissolve beneath it. Around 11,000 years ago, scattered across continents, something began to stir. Suddenly, human beings everywhere started to build again. Not huts or caves, but monuments. In the hills of Anatolia, massive pillars of limestone rose at Göbekli Tepe, carved with the images of animals long extinct. In the Andean highlands, mysterious platforms and walls took shape, as if cut by machines. And in Egypt, on the edge of the Sahara, the earliest foundations of sacred architecture appeared, long before the pharaohs, long before history had a name. It is as if, after the flood, a hidden memory reawakened, and the survivors began to reconstruct the image of a world they could no longer reach. At Göbekli Tepe, the stones are arranged not as random art, but as a language. The circles align with stars. The carvings depict constellations frozen in time, the sky as it appeared 12,000 years ago. Whoever built it knew the heavens intimately. They were mapping a memory, preserving it in stone so it would not vanish again. Similar alignments appear across the planet. In Peru, the site of Caral, one of the oldest known cities, is arranged to mark the solstice sunrise. In India, Rakhigarhi follows the geometry of the stars. In Mexico, the pyramids of Teotihuacan form the same celestial pattern found at Giza. Separated by oceans, yet speaking the same cosmic language. These were not coincidences. They were connections. What kind of people could have carried such knowledge across continents so far apart? Some say it was pure evolution, that humanity simply reached a threshold of intelligence. But the suddenness, the precision, the scale, it feels like memory, not invention. Maybe the survivors of the flood didn't just rebuild, maybe they taught. Maybe they became the culture bringers, the wandering architects who appeared in myths around the world. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, those who descended from the heavens. In Egypt, they were the followers of Thoth, the keeper of wisdom. The Maya spoke of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent who came across the sea. And in South America, the Andean people remembered Viracocha, the bearded stranger who taught them how to build and measure the stars. Different lands, different names, but the same story. A luminous figure emerging after a cataclysm, bringing knowledge from before the darkness. Could all of these legends describe the same people, or the same lineage? If the world truly drowned twice, then those who survived the second flood would have been the inheritors of both. They would have carried the wisdom of ages older than time, passing it on through myths, carvings, and the geometry of the heavens. Archaeology calls them primitive. Myth calls them gods. Maybe they were something in between, human, but with memories that stretched beyond one lifetime, beyond one world. We often look at the great monuments, Göbekli Tepe, the pyramids, Stonehenge, and wonder how they were built. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the real question is why they were built. What were these survivors trying to say to us through stone and star? Perhaps they were leaving messages for the next cycle, a warning encoded in architecture, in myth, in alignments. They knew the flood would come again. They knew the world would forget, and they built in stone so that memory would endure longer than flesh. All across the globe, those same patterns repeat. Temples aligned to solstices, myths of gods who weep for the lost age, symbols of serpents, suns and floodwaters carved into pillars that have stood for 12 millennia. It's as if humanity has been trying to remember something we were never supposed to forget. Maybe that's why the survivors became gods in our stories, because memory itself is divine. Because to remember what came before the flood is to see the truth of the cycle. We rise, we fall, and the world begins again. The survivors didn't vanish. They became the architects of history. Their knowledge flowed like rivers from one age into the next, until only fragments remained, scattered among myths, stones and stars. And somewhere among those fragments, perhaps, lies the key to everything we've lost. But if these survivors left behind such knowledge, if they encoded their warnings and wisdom in the monuments of stone, then one question remains. Where did that knowledge come from in the first place? Who taught them, the first survivors, to read the stars, to measure the heavens, to build as if guided by something greater? In the next chapter, we'll follow that trail, from earth to sky, from stone to map, to the ancient diagrams that may reveal where this wisdom truly began. Could it be that the survivors were not just builders, but keepers of a blueprint left by the gods themselves? Every civilization begins by looking up. Before the first city, before the first word written in clay, our ancestors read the sky. They mapped the heavens not just to mark time or seasons, but to remember. Because when the earth changes, when mountains rise and seas swallow the land, only the stars remain the same. Perhaps that's why the survivors of the flood built their temples in alignment with the constellations. The sky was their archive. The heavens were their hard drive. The stars never sank. And yet, scattered across the world, there are maps that seem to remember things no one alive should have known. Maps drawn in eras when much of the earth was still unseen, when continents were thought to end where the horizon began. These are the maps of memory. The most famous among them is the Piri Reis map, created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. It was compiled from even older charts. Ancient maps from the time of Alexander, he claimed, drawn long before ships could sail those waters. When researchers later studied it, they saw something impossible: the coastline of Antarctica without ice. That continent, buried under kilometers of snow for tens of thousands of years, appeared on parchment as a living land. Rivers, mountains, valleys, all in their proper proportions. The last time Antarctica was ice-free was more than 12,000 years ago, around the very time the world last drowned. How could anyone have known its shape? Mainstream historians call it coincidence, a distorted guess, a cartographer's mistake. But if it were just that, why does the same pattern appear in other maps? Like the Oronce-Finet map of 1531 or the Boachi map of the 18th century, both showing a southern continent beneath the ice. If the data behind these maps really came from a lost source, then someone, somewhere, once had the means to see the world as if from above, to measure coastlines thousands of miles apart with astonishing accuracy. The question is, who? Across cultures, there are whispers of those who measured the earth. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. The Egyptians spoke of Thoth, who drew the lines of the world. In Mesoamerica, they were the followers of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who taught men to count the stars. In Polynesia, navigators memorized the heavens as if reading a living map, crossing oceans guided only by starlight. Perhaps these are not separate myths, but fading memories of a science so ancient we mistook it for magic. The further we look, the stranger it becomes. At Nazca, immense lines stretch across the desert, visible only from the sky. At Giza, the three great pyramids mirror the belt of Orion. At Angkor Wat, the towers replicate the constellation Draco. The same alignment, the same geometry, the same silent code repeated again and again, as if someone wanted us to look up, to remember the pattern in the heavens that once guided an entire world. Could these alignments have been a way to rebuild lost geography after the flood? A celestial coordinate system, connecting what was above to what had been below? Maybe the survivors carved the stars into stone because they were trying to recreate the only map that still existed, the one written across the night sky. In the 16th century, a scholar named Charles Hapgood proposed that these ancient charts, including the Piri-Reis map, were fragments of a world map made by an advanced civilization long before known history. Albert Einstein himself read Hapgood's work and admitted that it posed a mystery science could not yet explain. If true, those ancient mapmakers must have had instruments, mathematics, and a perspective far beyond their time. As if they had viewed Earth from the air, or even from orbit, were they travellers from an earlier epoch of humanity, before the last cataclysm wiped the slate clean? Or could they have inherited their knowledge from something older still, from beings who walked among them, as the myths so often suggest? Every line on those maps, every alignment of stone, seems to whisper the same message. We were here before. We knew this world before it changed. Do not forget what the ocean hides. And yet, we have forgotten. We have all the stars, all the maps, all the stones, but we no longer remember how to read them. Maybe that is why these relics survive. Not to prove anything, but to remind us that memory itself is fragile. It fades unless it is drawn, carved, repeated, in sky, in stone, in story. The maps of memory show us that history may be far older than we think, and that our ancestors might not have been looking for new lands at all, but old ones, trying to redraw the world they'd already lost. If that's true, then somewhere beneath the waves, the rest of their map still waits, the missing pieces of a planet we've forgotten. But if these maps were their legacy, what about the message within them? What were they trying to tell us about the world, or about themselves? And why, among all these echoes of floods and stars, do the stories of giants appear next? Beings who shaped the very stones that still stand today? Could it be that the builders of these ancient maps were not merely human, but the same giants whose monuments have endured every flood, every fire, and every age of forgetting? The sea is patient. It waits. It remembers everything we forget. Long before history began, before writing, before the first stone was raised in worship, there were worlds that no longer exist. Continents now buried beneath the ocean, cities erased by time, stories that survived only as whispers. We have followed those whispers, from Atlantis in the Atlantic, to Lemuria in the Indian Ocean, to Mu across the Pacific, to Doggerland beneath the cold North Sea, and Sunderland beneath the warm equatorial waves. Different names, same memory, a world that drowned. For centuries we believed these were myths until the evidence emerged. Sediment layers, seafloor maps, and ice cores now tell the same story the ancients did. 2 sudden floods, 2 cataclysms, 2 global resets. Around 14,600 years ago, the first deluge struck. The ice melted, and the oceans rose by more than 20 meters. The Earth's surface changed overnight. Then around 11,600 years ago, it happened again. A second flood, violent and fast, marking the end of the Younger Dryas, the very moment Plato said Atlantis was swallowed by the sea. The Earth, it seems, does not move in straight lines. It moves in cycles, great pulses of creation and destruction, each one wiping the slate clean. And after each flood, a few survivors began again. They carried memories of stars, of geometry, of balance. They built with stone what water could not erase. Perhaps they were the ancestors of those who carved Göbekli Tepe, aligned Giza to the heavens, or mapped the world before it was drowned. Perhaps every beginning we know is only a remembering. We are told civilization began 6,000 years ago, but maybe that is just the point where memory finally resurfaced, because before the first temples rose, before the first kings ruled, the world had already ended, twice. 2 floods, 2 silences, 2 chances to start again. And now the tides are rising once more. The ice melts, the poles shift, the pattern returns. We are standing at the edge of another cycle, staring at the same horizon our ancestors once watched, believing, as they did, that the sea will never reach us. But the ocean never forgets. It only waits. Maybe that's why these stories endure, not as myth, but as memory. Because deep down we know the flood will come again, and when it does, the question will not be whether we can survive it, but whether we will remember what the last world forgot. If history truly repeats, then the greatest act of defiance is to remember, to learn, to leave something behind that cannot be washed away. So tonight, as you look into the dark mirror of the sea, ask yourself, are we the beginning of a new world, or the echo of the one that sank twice? If you've journeyed with us through the forgotten continents, the floods, and the memories buried beneath the sea, don't let the story end here. Like this episode, if you believe the past still speaks. Share it with someone who needs to remember, and subscribe to Forgotten Worlds to continue exploring the hidden chapters of our history, the mysteries, the myths, and the echoes of worlds lost to time. Because some stories were never meant to stay buried.